Today I would like to speak about evolution, immortality, perception of time, and what is actually time, what is actually lifespan. For example, if you look at a butterfly lives, say, one day or half a day, but for a butterfly that is flying around, the perception of that one day, or for its own body, for its dimension, for its consciousness, that one day is that 100 years of our human life. And so when we speak in terms of evolution, evolution means breaching the dimensional boundaries, breaching the boundaries of time. And the only way we can breach the boundaries of time is by having more energy, because time and energy is one and the same thing. That's why most of the spiritual teachings are about preservation of energy, cultivation of energy. But you cannot just preserve or cultivate something that you don't have. That's why the true teaching, or the secret of all the teachings, remains kind of concealed. And it's about reconnection, it's about awakening to the source, or to at least, we can't even say it's a source, but it's a higher dimension of time and space continuum. So the more we evolve, the more we discover further and further, or deeper and deeper, whichever way you want to look at it, because it's not a three-dimensional understanding, but the deeper we connect with the higher dimension of ourselves we connect with, the more access to energy we receive. And so we breach these boundaries of time. So when people say, I just want to live forever, it's impossible. It's a process. It has to be a part of natural evolution. When you breach these boundaries of time and space in order to gain more energy. Immortals, for our understanding, is beings who have breached this dimension, these boundaries, and gained access to more energy. And this energy comes from a different dimension. This energy comes from the subtler dimensions. And even when you're on a subtler dimension, let's say your perception of time, the capacity of your consciousness to perceive time and space expands, and so you start perceiving time, say 1,000 of years is a normality for you. Say you start being in that space of a lifespan where 1,000 of years is normality. Then the further you go, the further you evolve, then 100,000 years becomes a normality. And so what makes the difference is the expansion of consciousness. When consciousness expands, it gains access to a different space. It gains access to a different dimension, you may say, where the flow of time and space is comprehended differently, is perceived differently. And by dissolving the current dimension's limitations, you gain access to that dimensional limitations. And so, in comparison with other beings on this dimension, you in a way become immortal, because these dimensional limitations are no longer valid for you. You also gain abilities of the subtle dimension. And that's why people may call you as a being with supernatural abilities. But supernatural abilities per se do not define your evolution. What defines your evolution is that inner perception of time that is defined by the energy that you gained by having gotten in touch with the higher dimension. And the more you cultivate yourself on the subtle dimension, aligning yourself with the subtle dimension, the more this body on this dimension gets enlightened, and yet at some point it will need to be dissolved, because the subtle body, the light body, will take over. And this is the whole point. Sometimes when people want to, contain all this truth, they have simply no capacity. Their mind, consciousness are not awakened. And even when you experience awakening, you still need to do a lot of refinement, and this refinement is nothing but the dissolution of these karmic limitations and boundaries that consume your energy and limit your time, your lifespan, not allowing you to connect to the subtle dimensions. So even if you want to understand higher spiritual knowledge and cultivate your light body, you have to have that energy, capacity, time to do so. And for that, you need to observe and realize all these limitations and dissolve them by letting go, by realizing their importance. And by realizing that, you no longer pay attention to all these aspects of reality that you've been paying attention to before. And so you unbind yourself from that projected reality that sucks your energy. And so you get more energy left to reconnect with your higher or subtler being with subtler dimensions of yourself, so that you can actually evolve and dissolve these time and space limitations at some point. So when we speak of immortality, it's not some sort of a myth or a fairy tale. It is the reality, it is the science which is not known. And it is not known because still we are only dreaming of true spirituality. We are not tapped to our higher dimensions. Even if those who are awakened are still in the process of self-refinement, so they spend a lot of energy to refine themselves, to dissolve their corruption, their trauma. And that's why the subject kind of remains in the field of the, unreachable or unknown, really, from the experience. Because only few at this point of time in this Kali Yuga can actually breach these boundaries or have breached these boundaries. And that's why, because we don't know, we don't have clear evidence, we think it's a myth, it's unreal, and yet it is real. And again, immortality differs, because the more you evolve, the more you become, let's say, the longer lived, or it's more about longevity, because eventually, even if you're immortal, you will feel like this body on this dimension has no longer any purpose for you, so you'll dissolve it or you leave it, and you will continue living in the subtle body which has fully matured and cultivated. So in a way, we're speaking about different perception of time and space, and usually we can experience that through different cycles, like Satya Yuga, or whatever names you give them. Kali Yuga has a short span of life because the collective consciousness is dispersed, and the energy that every individual unit has is very limited. The moment these limitations are breached, this individual being may start having access to more energy, because they have access to the subtler dimensions of themselves, to the collective dimension, and thus they gain longevity in comparison with all the rest. So everyone's mind also is limited, and that's why the way we perceive time is defined by our evolutionary level. And so even though we may all appear in the same body, but depending on our evolutionary level of our personal individual soul, we will perceive time differently. The more we evolve, the more the time starts flowing in a different manner, and we perceive time kind of differently. We are no longer touched by certain elements or aspects by the projected reality, and we shift into a different time paradigm where the pace of life is slower, where you're more content and blissful, and so all the processes are perceived, the processes of life are perceived differently. So, and the body is a reflection usually of that. So thank you very much.